This is the Red Podcast.
This is episode number 21. Today, Laurel and I will be talking about how to make your life bigger and bolder by simply thinking about it. Yes, it's possible. The book is called The Magic of Thinking Big. We'll be going over 5 big ideas that you can implement right away to change your life and change your business. That's coming up on Red Podcast.
This is the Red Podcast. Real entrepreneur development. Make more money, work less, and live a life of freedom. No BS advice that really works. Here's your hosts, David Hooper and Laurel Staples.
So David, as you know, I just hired an image consultant, and I think I'm going to send her over to you when I'm done.
I could use probably about 2 or 3 of those image consultants.
Well, I'm so excited. She's kind of going to help me with everything from clothing to hair to makeup to accessories. I'm pretty excited. I have really no idea about this stuff. Yeah. I don't know why, but women, unless you read a lot of like fashion magazines, which I don't, then there's no training for us on this stuff. You reach your 30s and it's like, well, I'm not in my 20s, so I don't want to look like that. So I have no idea what to wear.
Yeah, guys have it a lot easier.
Yeah, guys, it's like, okay, jeans, button down. Easy.
I don't even go for the button down.
Okay, your case, jeans, t-shirt. That's why I'm sending her over to you.
We'll see.
Awesome.
She might quit. She might rethink her career.
Well, she's coming over to look at my closet soon, so she'll see your stuff and she'll know. So
yeah, my little corner of the closet. Who
has
all those T-shirts?
You have half the closet. You have more clothes than I do. Let's be honest.
Do I?
You have more clothes and more shoes than I do.
You do need an image consultant. Then you're doing the right thing, baby.
Well, today on the show, we are not going to be talking about fashion because we don't know anything about fashion, but we are going to be talking about a book that you told me about, David, called The Magic of Thinking Big.
Oh, yeah. This is a great book.
Tell me about how you heard about that book, because there's 6 million copies in print. So if you're listening and you have heard of that book, there are a lot of copies in print.
6 million copies in print. And by the way, it's worth noting that if you would like a copy of the audiobook for free, you can go to receivethebook.com and Magic of Thinking Big. David Schwartz is the author. You can download it free with an Audible trial. But it's one of those classic, I'm going to call it New Thought books. I would put it up there with Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. It's one of those books. It's written a little bit later. I'm not sure when it was written. Some of the referencing is pretty funny, and I love your opinion on this. He's always talking about company men and working for big companies like Xerox or IBM, or some of those companies probably don't even exist anymore.
I mean, it's a lot about the working man working up in the industry. So it's not necessarily entrepreneur related, but it has, all the concepts in there can be utilized by entrepreneurs.
It's about moving up in your career, whether you're working for somebody else or yourself. And I think that it works for entrepreneurs in the kind of self-employed generation that we're in right now.
So how did you learn about it? Did you tell us that?
I learned about it just because it's one of those books that everybody has read, and I wanted to get in on the conversation. So I picked it up, and I kept it on my shelf, kept it on my shelf. I was like, the magic of thinking big. I'm already thinking big. And finally read it, and I remember reading it, and it was like the right place at the right time for me, and really challenged me to think outside of my comfort zone, think even bigger than I was. And I've been a fan of it ever since. I've recommended it to several people. So when you were looking for a book to read, that's why that came up.
You gave it to me, actually. What was it, for my birthday? Christmas?
I give you so many gifts, Laurel, that I can't keep track. Yeah, I think I bought you a bunch of stuff that we try to be practical. We should probably mention that you and I are not a couple I did bring you flowers today, though.
You did. But you're not going to give me jewelry, but you are going to give me like business books, which if you know me, that's like awesome.
Well, we try to give gifts that we're either going to use or experiential gifts. We don't want to clutter our house just full of junk, and flowers, we can throw that in the composter.
Oh, yeah.
And grow something with it.
Exactly.
So that's on the list. But yeah, I got you a copy of The Magic of Thinking Big because you're in a process right now with writing your own book. I know how important thinking big is. There are a lot of things that kind of come down on you when you're going through that process and when you're going through the process of building a business. Not that you're in really the building business mode. You're pretty comfortable there. And
I'm in the building book mode.
Building book mode, yeah, I think that's a better name for it. But we're always building our businesses because we are in an industry. Everybody who's self-employed or owns a company is in this industry that's very fluid. You have to run if you want to stand still, if that makes sense. So
no, that makes no sense. You have to run if you
have to run just to stand still.
It's like a treadmill.
Yeah, you got to keep moving, and you're not necessarily going to be moving forward by running, so you've got to run even faster. What I'm saying is that the business is very fluid now, so we're always looking to do things that are going to help us out, and sometimes to do that, to move forward, you have to go backward to the classic books, and Magic of Thinking Big is certainly one of them. And we wrote down a few of our favorite parts of the book, which we're going to be discussing today.
Everything in this book, I mean, it's every chapter that I read, I'm like, yes, okay, yeah, I need to implement that, or I need to put that in my book, or I need to talk about that on the blog. So it was kind of hard to come out of this with some favorite points because David Schwartz has so many helpful points. And a lot of these things are things you already know or you've already thought about, but just being reminded of them is absolutely critical. I mean, you talked about you always got to be building, and you always got to be working on your personal development as an entrepreneur and working on your business, and just being reminded of these facts is really helpful.
Yeah, it's nothing that I think that you won't have heard before if you've read any of these other books I've mentioned, Think and Grow Rich, The Science of Getting Rich, any of these classic New Thought or business building books. But the stories that he talks about, it can kind of piece some things together where you oh yeah, okay, now I get what people are talking about. And the first one that we wrote down here, it sounds so simple. The first big point of this that I really liked, and you did too, Laurel, it's believe big. Sounds obvious, right? Duh, the magic of thinking big. Obviously, you've got to think big.
You got to think big and believe big. I mean, if you don't think about, if you don't have a vision for your business or for your life that's a big vision, well, you're never going to get there. You know, if you set your sights short, you're going to arrive at that short-sightedness.
And you can't just start thinking really big if you're not a person that is congruent with those beliefs. And I can tell you a story if you want, Laurel, about how I ended up in my last house. Not the current house that you and I are in together, but my last house was a big step up for me. And I can tell you that story if you're interested.
Yeah, believing big.
So
all right.
The very first place that I got was a smaller place. It's what I would consider a starter home. It's the one, I talked about it earlier when I moved to Nashville. I bought it actually sight unseen. Just bought it. Great place, great neighborhood, loved it, but it got to the point where it just wasn't where I needed to be. I was bigger than that house by the time I was done living there. So I started looking at houses, and I could feel myself moving away from the current place that I was in. And the thing that I did was I basically doubled the price of the house that I was living in. That was as big as I could think. I was like, well, you know, I've been here a few years, so why don't I look for a house that's twice as expensive? Got a realtor, started looking at houses, and we started with houses in that price range. And pretty soon, I was looking at houses that were 50% more than that. And the houses kept getting bigger and bigger. And I remember I went into a place that was about 8 times as much as I had bought my first house for. And I said, wow, this would really be great to live here. It had a deck that was about 1,500 square feet, and it overlooked the skyline of Nashville. I said, this is my place. This is where a guy that owns a business like I do needs to be. And I was fascinated by this place, and I was continuing to look at places. And I remember a couple weeks later, I mentioned it to a realtor. I was at an open house, just kind of getting into the mindset of housing. And he said that that place had just sold. A couple from California had just bought it. They sold a huge place out in Los Angeles. And a lot of people do that because of the entertainment business. They come to Nashville. It's a lot cheaper to live. And they'd paid cash. I was like, oh, I've got to find another place. And the end result was that I found a place just like I wanted. It had a rooftop deck. It had fire on the deck. You know this place because this is where I was living when we first met. It had 10-foot ceilings, solid wood throughout, everything that I wanted, and plenty of light. That was one of the things that I wanted. It was about 6 times more than my first house and about 3 times more than I'd planned on spending just a year prior. You work yourself into that. Eventually you start feeling like, yeah, I can make this happen. And then your mind backs that up by thinking of ways how you can actually do that. So I was able to do that, but it took a while. I had to use stair steps. And that's how I think Believing Big works. And I think that the book has some great examples of how you can put this into action if you're looking to step out from where you are, but you don't quite know how you're going to get there. This book can help.
And it doesn't even have to be something that's as big as real estate, but that's a really great example that you have. But it could be something as simple as writing a book like I'm doing. You got to have that big vision for the book and that the book is going to do really well. If you think you're going to write a book and it's going to bomb, you've already sabotaged yourself.
And sometimes it starts small, though. If you think about the book you're writing now, Laurel, it started as a short project. We've talked about this in the How to Write a Book episode of Red Podcast, that my original book that I did last, hey, this will take about 60 days. And 2 years later, I was done with it. And yours has been the same way. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you've worked yourself up to that.
Mm-hmm. But I think going in believing that it will be successful, that you will be successful, that you can have what you want. And when you believe that, things fall into place to become congruent with that.
So another thing that we loved about this book, it talks about action curing fear. And we talked about this just a couple episodes ago, episode number 19, we were talking about building confidence. So redpodcast.com/19 if you're interested in that. But you've got a great story about action curing fear, Laurel.
Have I told you my story about climbing the 40-foot pole?
Yeah, because I was there videotaping it.
I know. Have I told it on the podcast?
No, you haven't told that story.
Well, if I have, then I apologize.
And it was 50 feet.
Okay, a 50-foot pole.
It was 25% more terrifying.
25. Well, David, as you know, we went to Adventure Works. Is that what it was called? And it had zip lining and different courses. But there was this pole. It was a telephone. Well, it wasn't a telephone pole, but it was a cedar tree where all the limbs had been chopped off. And it was as tall as a telephone pole. And it had a tiny little platform.
I think it was a 1 foot by 1 foot platform at the very, very top.
It didn't feel that big, but we'll go with that. So you got to climb up this 50-foot pole, this former cedar tree, on the little branches, and then get up, somehow find a way to get up on that little tiny platform at the top. And then this thing is wobbling, so you're wobbling up 50 feet in the air. Then you got to stand up, and they give you, you're obviously roped, harnessed in at this time, so you're not going to free fall or anything. And then you have to jump off, and they give you a stick to ring a bell that's hanging from an adjacent tree.
Yeah, about 6 feet away, there's a bell, and they want you to ring it. And the whole process of that involves you actually jumping off a platform that's 50 feet in the air. So it's kind of scary. Did you look down when you were up there?
I did. They say don't look down. But I did. I mean, you're wobbling and you're looking down, but I was trying to look forward. But the point is, a lot of people, including people in our group, couldn't even get halfway up the pole.
Some people didn't even, they were like, hell no.
Some people wouldn't try it. Some people couldn't get up the pole. Some people would get to the platform and kind of like cling onto it with their chest, but like couldn't get on it. So it's a terrifying thing to do. So I get up there. I manage to stand up. I'm shaking. The pole is shaking. I'm terrified. I pull my stick out of the harness that I'm in. and I look at the bell, and what I do is I close my eyes and I jump off and I miss the bell. And I'm so upset. I'm not so upset, but